Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the KB Show. We've got Glen Carroll with us. Very, very fortunate to have him on. Thanks for coming on, mate. He is an online personal trainer. He is a wealth of knowledge. He's obviously done a lot of studying as well. We're going to get into that. But thanks for coming on, mate.
Cheers, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
First thing we're going to do is just talk about sort of life, a little bit of life pre-fitness game and why you got into the fitness game.
Yeah, so like a lot of people, I'm very sporty background, athletic. And I always loved moving, but initially I ended up pursuing something that I thought I should do. So actually I went and studied and did a Bachelor of Commerce at university. And the plan was to take over my dad's accounting business until I realized the reality of what's required in business and the reality of sitting at a desk.
Yep.
And so I quickly realized that wasn't for me, though I did give it a go for a while. And I was actually studying a master's of applied finance for a while, working in finance for a bit, and wasn't a good fit.
Yeah.
And so I aborted that, went overseas, traveled around, and came back and did an exercise and sports science degree, which was challenging given I didn't have a science background, but I actually really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate the science now. And within that time, I actually already started my PT training a few years earlier, but I was just doing it for fun. And I always loved training. And then when I was doing exercise science, I was also doing some SNC, strength and conditioning coaching, which I really, really love as well. And after a couple of years, got into the gym game, PT game, and I worked at a commercial gym for quite a few years, running my own business, and I enjoyed that, but I was very much finding my feet.
Yep.
And eventually, I guess, I just got surrounded by the right people, and Mark, my brother, and we very much just dived into trying to learn more, because there were some coaches and trainers that we really looked up to. And so we really attacked the knowledge game, and within a couple of years, we'd really accelerated ourselves. And from there, we actually ended up working for a few really senior companies. So we both worked for Ultimate Performance, Transformation Specialists. We both worked for Clean Health. So I was a head of education for a while, a head educator for Clean Health for quite a few years. So and eventually, between that time, I was working for myself, and a few years later, I returned to working for myself, and so being online coaching for quite a few years now, and my wife's on board with me, Amanda, now, and we've got a few more coaches coming on as well. So that's sort of how I got to here. But I was always very curious, and I like to know the why and explain things, and I can sometimes go down deep wormholes, but I find it interesting. And so I always want to know more and be challenged. And so I've always loved movement, science, performance, and I've sort of fallen into the physique world, which is hilarious because I don't really care how I look, to be honest. Usually.
I've noticed with a lot of your stuff, it is quite functionality as well as a little bit obviously bodybuilding, but mostly functionality, isn't it?
It is interesting because I actually train quite a few elite physique athletes now. I guess my brain's quite clinical and data-driven, and so I've got a keen eye for...
Coming back from the finance days.
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a data nerd on that front, and I love anatomy, and so I've sort of evolved in that industry, became a qualified nutritionist, and so I actually really love the manipulation of things like energy balance and the nutritional prescription side of things as well. And most recently, I've just been nerding out on the programming side of things, from like program design and all that sort of stuff. So I always want to position my clients for optimal success, and so I wanted to know the why and just get better. I don't like staying the same. So I was always trying to get better and evolve. So I've always loved coaching. Is how I describe pretty much. I started coaching when I was 13.
Really?
I started captaining teams when I was 9.
Yeah.
So
you've always had that.
Yeah. So like
leadership about you.
Yeah. So like my Instagram handle is Coach Carroll, but it's not something I just plucked off the street. It's been something
sounds catchy.
It sounds catchy. I actually had it before Mark, and everyone has coached this after Mark became coach that. But I had it first. But yeah, I love coaching, and I love the communication side of things and the connection side of things. And Kimmy, one of my clients, also is going to become one of my employees. So I always like connecting with other coaches as well. So
So Breaking This podcast is brought to you by King Beats Apparel. So support the podcast by shopping King Beats. We got the first one, Not Your Average Gym. It's got a screen print on the back. And then we got the Gotcha Shake as well. I'm rocking an XL for this. I'm 95 kilos and 6'1". So jump over, support the podcast, and grab yourself a
So you mentioned before that you spoke something about evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you're drawn to a lot? And that's like the reason why you have such a comprehensive knowledge of the fitness game is just you're always trying to sort of evolve yourself. And then as a consequence of that, your clients are just learning from you and you're just tailoring to them?
Yeah, so on the client side of things, I always want a client to leave me in a better position than they started with me. And I realized maybe a couple of years ago there was a big focus on transformations, which I liked because there was a push and there was an end date. But I dug a bit deeper and it's sort of like, well, what about the after picture? And so that's how I've very much evolved into education to better position a client to succeed post me, because I'm wanting more sustainable results. And that's why I'm a big fan of reverse dieting, which I'd happily talk more on. But I think that's a very misunderstood concept and how to execute it as well. But in terms of evolution for me, I think it came back to me being young and probably quite immature when I was at school and not understanding the importance of education. I was more just interested in sport, which is a funny match given I was at an academic school. And it wasn't until I sort of got a bit older and realized I had a brain. I was like, okay, probably should use this old thing. Body won't last forever.
Yeah, that's it.
So yeah, I just find things that keeps me interested and just stimulating. And so if something doesn't interest me, I usually evolve and move on. And I just want to keep getting better. I don't want to be a specialist. So that's why some people
that is interesting. Yeah.
Some people are comp prep specialists, strength specialists, whatever specialists. I very much want to be a specialist generalist in some ways, though I'd probably have a few specialties, but you'll never hear me call myself like an expert or a specialist or anything like that. So.
Yeah. And I kind of commend you on that because some people will have a specialty to almost have a niche, if that sort of makes sense. It's something that they can really focus on their marketing, really focus on their target audience.
Yeah.
But obviously you just wanting to progress yourself.
Yeah.
It's commendable because the people that do come to you are obviously going to get a lot more comprehensive approach rather than someone who goes start, end.
Yeah, exactly. And so I coach a wide array of people and coach 2 world champions currently. The one's a physique-based world champion, one's a wrestling world champion.
Wow.
I coach AFL players. I coach a lot of general population. Probably half to 2/3 of my clients are other coaches as well. But I still really like general population work, but I view everyone as an athlete. And it's very much you have to move well, recover well, fuel your body, but be very selective in terms of your pursuits, but be very specific in what you are pursuing. So it's very much, okay, well, what's your priority goal? Not just what are all your goals.
Yeah.
I think there's too much general prescription in the industry. And when we think about the fitness industry, well, fitness is a very broad term, and that can encompass a lot of different things. And so I very much don't view myself as a trainer or working just in the fitness industry. I'm qualified in a lot of domains just because I want to be as good as possible across a lot of different disciplines. And so I just find everything interesting. And once I've sort of solved something, it's like, okay, cool, let's keep expanding upon it. But what else can we add to my abilities?
Just wanted to touch on there. You spoke about being specific with your goals.
Mm-hmm.
What would that look like, say, to the average person, or say they're trying to lose weight?
Yep.
And I get a lot of this, obviously being a PT myself, I get a lot of people coming in, hey, I want to lose weight.
Yep.
A lot of people don't know the exact amount, what they're also wanting to achieve throughout it. Like, as someone who's obviously had a lot of experience with online, what would you like to see with someone coming forward and deciding on their goals before they move ahead?
Yeah, well, obviously a lot of people want to do something. And I think the first thing to identify is you may want something, but are you ready for that?
Yep.
And so that's the reality. And even if you are ready for something like a fat loss pursuit, are you willing to do what's required to support that pursuit? And so for a lot of people, they may want something, but are they willing to actually not go and get smashed on a Saturday night with boys or the girls?
Yep.
And are they willing to be a bit more proactive with their nutritional choices, or embrace periods where the process is hard. And I think with the glorification of diet culture, I think people can be sort of sold the perception of how good it will be getting there, but the process is hard. The outcome is brilliant, but the process is hard. And for some people, the process can be easier than others. For other people, it's disgustingly hard. And a lot of people may not like that reality, but it's the truth. And it's like anything, everything exists across the continuum. Some people it's hardish, some people it's horrible, but some people it's not too bad. And so I think the big thing when it comes to people is identifying what do you need to achieve your result. And you don't want to compare yourself to your favorite Instagram influencer or physique athlete. You have to do what supports your pursuit. And sometimes that may be a bit more work or a little less food than you may like. But the big thing is that you have a choice in this, and that's what's required for some people, not everyone. We don't want that, but sometimes you have to push a bit, but that pursuit is temporary. And we don't want to live in that scenario. And I think a lot of people get stuck in diet culture where it's a matter of, well, I have to push hard forever. Well, no, you want to push hard when you need to. And the better you nail your dieting pursuit, the less you have to actually diet. And that's why I'm so selective when I diet clients, and why I'm so big on things like reverse dieting and maintenance and just lifestyle modifications to make sure we don't have to diet as much, because we have a better ability to simply maintain our weight. And I think that's something that's not as sexy, but it's something that's probably more important. And so it may not always sell, but that's why I love posting like more like 12-month transformations, where it's like, yeah, I got a wicked result, but I may have taken quite a few months to diet a client. So be very, very selective. And I want to always position a client to start a dieting pursuit when they're ready, and I'm confident I know what they need and where they're at. Because a lot of people, general population, they're all over the place, and that's okay. Like, I'm a bit all over the place at the moment now too. But we have to get a bit of foundational information to then drop into a potential deficit to support a pursuit versus just assuming someone's ready. And so I think there's everyone wants to rush a dieting phase, but I'm more sort of like, well, let's pick the right dieting phase so you do it properly, you get some momentum, and then you get a bit of a roll-on effect, and you get the buy-in from the client if they actually get that initial momentum. But then it gets hard after 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. So that's why I'm a big fan of using things like cyclical nutrition, like diet breaks, refeeds, because adherence is probably the most important factor when it comes to dieting success, as is getting momentum.
I think that's probably one of the most important factors really is the adherence. I think everyone sort of knows how to eat healthy in some way or another.
Yeah.
You've got plenty of obviously information on your page about how to do so. But it is the actual adherence. And it's quite good that you say actually about sort of their lifestyle and where they're at in life, because I know plenty of people that have this amazing goal that they want to try and obviously lose this amount of weight, and it's always sort of falls around the summertime when it's like Christmas, New Year's Eve, and all these things coming up, and or you'll get them come to you and they're like, oh yeah, I want to do your 12-week program, but I've got a friend's birthday and then I've got holidays, and it's like, what's the rush? Like,
yeah, and I think when we think about dieting for endpoints, it's like, well, hypothetically, I don't know, it's your Christmas party, December 20th. It's like, you don't have to diet up to December 19, and then it's like, oh, YOLO, let's go. It's silly season, sweet. It's like, well, why not diet up to November 30th, and you spend a few weeks reversing out and better positioning yourself to enjoy summer, but you're in a more safer position, so to speak, where you're not just day one, I've just finished, like, because your body and psychology has evolved after a dieting pursuit. And so I think people can be a bit more strategic on their start points and their end points as well. And so often it's like, I'm dieting for a point and then I'm done. But it's always but it's always like, well, what's the plan once you're done? And I have a lot of very advanced like physique competitors who've gone through that same scenario, and they've smashed themselves, got a nice plastic trophy, but then it's like, well, how do you look 2 weeks later? But it's not just how you look 2 weeks later, it's how do you feel? And because if you see something you may not like, or if you crushed your soul for 6 months to look amazing, well, there's some care required to reverse out of that scenario, and general population is a bit different. And so I think that more coaches, more trainers, more nutritionists need to focus on the lifestyle side of things to better support a dieting attempt and create healthier lifestyles. And so for me, it's like diving into sleep, stress, steps, all those factors are so important, as is just simply thinking more about situations your clients are in. Because we're all human. We all have willpower, temptations and whatnot, but we have to be very realistic as to like our clients. We have to very much audit their needs and who are they. And some people may want something, but are they positioned to pursue something at the moment? And so that's why it's not so much tough love. I think it's more honest conversations and deep assessments is what's really required to get someone to that ultimate point for them.
Yeah, and I think it's another reason to obviously commend you on that, because I think a lot of people, when they get into the industry, they're sort of happy to get the client on. So like, yeah, we can do it. Whereas I like obviously your approach where you seem a lot more realistic about it and say, hey, you may be not quite ready. Not saying that you can't get to your goal, but you just might have to go this way around instead of trying to plow through, and you won't be able to get the results that you want anyway. Yeah,
exactly. And I think it's very much like, obviously, like there's a large element of sales and business, like any industry, but I think I'm more interested in sustainable solutions or long-term success.
I love that word in this industry, so sustainable.
I'm not looking for quick fixes is what I tell a client. I'm looking for like sustainable results. But again, when we think about a result, we have to think, well, what is a result? And for some people, that could look very different to another.
True.
And so for one person, it could be simply like having a better relationship with food as well. And so people sort of get a bit lost in comparison these days. So we have to be careful in comparing results. So that's important to flag as well.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit about reverse dieting there. I think we should probably touch on it a little bit for the audience.
Sure.
Sort of, we'll just break it down nice and simple. So we'll go, what's the pros of doing a reverse diet? So this is coming out of a diet phase. And what's the cons of potentially not doing it?
Yeah, so reverse dieting is, in simple terms, is trying to strategically reverse yourself back to a position of maintenance, but not just maintenance calories, but maintenance activity. Some people have to push harder from an activity standpoint, some people more so than others, and so they might be doing a lot more steps, more cardio, more activity, and that generally won't be sustainable long term. And so we want to get a client back to a happy point whilst minimizing the amount of body fat acquisition in the process, because you should always weigh a bit more post-diet just simply by adding in more food, especially more carbohydrates. Like you should weigh more. If you think you weigh the same, you're mad. You don't understand physiology, but it's okay. But it's more that I think we need to think about what's the best exit strategy. So I more view it as, I do call it reverse dieting, but in some ways I think of it more as an exit strategy. Some people, that exit strategy from a diet could be rapid. It could be no reverse and they just go straight back to maintenance, because they may
or
be
even a surplus.
Yeah, exactly. Because you may have a very quick turnaround. You could be a person who's been suffering and you just want to feel better and you're okay with having a bit more body fat. But if you get back to maintenance quicker, you'll feel better. Another person may have a quicker turnaround because they may have a comp in 6 months or 3 months, and so they need faster regeneration. So the goal of reversing is just very much regeneration, body fat minimization as you exit, and just solidifying your effort post-dieting pursuit. Because what's the point in dieting for 4 months, 6 months if it's just you're going to put it back on, and you can put it back on rapidly, and you're literally primed to do so just due to the way humans are made. And so having some exit strategy is so important, but I think there's a distorted perception as to what reverse dieting is. And people think it's like, okay, hypothetically, female client, maintenance 2,200 calories, dieted all the way down to 1,200. That doesn't mean day one of your reverse, you just have 1,300 calories, and then 3 weeks later, 1,400 calories. The biggest tip I can ever give someone is that the first day of your diet being done is you go back to maintenance, but it's adjusted maintenance calories. And so what is adjusted? It depends. Depends what's happening on the scale. How do you feel? What's happening on the energy output side of things? How much are you moving? I usually try to get rid of what someone likes the least first. And so they're doing a lot of steps, so they're eating less food. Naturally, I want to get them to a better point. So it's big chip up initially, but what that big chip is contextual. So I've had clients I've had a lot of success with reverse dieting people, and I find it very rewarding because you can reverse diet for someone from low energy intake and they're not even trying to diet. And so they're at a relative energy deficiency, which is very suboptimal for their health. And I've had a lot of people who have exited from comps or dieting phases, and it won't take as long as the dieting attempt, but a few weeks to get you back to a better point in a strategic and incremental fashion. You very much should achieve a net win, is what I'd describe it. So you may have lost, hypothetically, 12% body weight in the dieting attempt. But if you've only gained 2-3% back on the scale post-dieting attempt when you're back at maintenance and your weight's stable, that is a massive net win. You've lost 10%. And so you should have better body comp and you're now at your maintenance again. So then if you do the right things at maintenance and then you focus on building, getting better, living a good life, the next dieting attempt you do pursue, you're at a closer point to your dream physique. So we're always trying to think about incremental progress and micro progression versus promise you everything is going to happen and change in 12 weeks. So I'm always trying to cultivate it's a multi-stage process or a long-term thinking, which is hard given the nature of humans, and we want it's human nature to want something now. So it can be challenging, but inch by inch and day by day, it does get a bit easier. But yeah, it's a process. But as you said right at the start, like I think some people can just go back to maintenance straight away, and that can be a great option, or even a surplus. That could be a great option. Everyone's different. Yeah. We also don't want to get stuck thinking we need to or should stay as we are when we've finished dieting. You may look great in pictures, but how do you feel?
Yeah.
How good of a life can you live living off high activity, low intake? Usually not so great. So we have to weigh up that cost or that negative as well. So the big con, so that's probably all the pros for me. And like the con is that, well, if you do it incorrectly, you can just extend the duration of the dieting phase. And so people, if they do it too slow, too cautiously, they just stay in low calorie land, or the land of suck, pretty much is what I call it. And we want to get away from suck down. And so that's why we want to get back to a better point. But again, if we're too obsessed with looking our best at one point, maybe we're depriving ourselves from getting to a better point down the line. And so sometimes people get too cute with it and they're too terrified of a little bit of body fat acquisition, which stunts their ability to progress later and get better. And people forget about that. So we have to transition between different priorities. And so I think the big thing, as soon as you've done your diet, is like, well, what's the new goal?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of options, but the more the client can have agency in that decision making, the better it's going to be. Exactly.
Yeah, it's almost like a little bit of a psychology 100%. To it, isn't it? Because you really think about it, if someone's prepping for a contest to get on stage, they're so tunnel vision to that one day, and then you bring them out the other side and it's like, hey, you got to look at the big picture now. And it's like, what do you mean? Like, I've been so tunnel vision for the last 16, well, even longer, sometimes 6 months. It can be so long. Do you find that hard, obviously trying to pull them out of that tunnel vision of just being focused and looking at that image that they see in front of themselves to say, hey, we need to do this to try and look at the big picture so you're ready in like a year or 2 years or whatever?
Yeah, I find these days, I guess I maybe attract people with a similar...
that's true, yeah.
It is a bit easier for me now, a bit more experienced, a bit more knowledgeable, I guess. So a bit of like sort of attraction occurs.
Yeah, sort of people know what they're getting when they come to you. They almost want that reverse dieting phase as part of the package.
And they've seen person X do it, so they want that. And I'll be very realistic and open with the client as to what's required and what's required for them as well. But yeah, I think that's a really important process in the dieting pursuit. And I'm just very, very selective in how I diet a client, when I diet. And I'm not afraid to say, stop. But I think people that appreciate, or my clients probably, that I'll call a spade, and sometimes if it's not working, it's like, well, it's okay. Like, we've learned stuff, we've acquired data, we've learned what doesn't work. And sometimes it's better to just reboot, focus on other facets of health and performance and life, and then pick another spot. Because that doesn't mean that you're a bad coach or they can't lose. It's maybe we've made a little error somewhere. There's an adherence error or life was crazy. And that's okay. And it's realistic. So it's not like, I think unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people sort of fall into the trap that I can't do this or have this because of this past failure or past experience, where it's more that maybe you just had the wrong protocols, which is very, very commonly prescribed. And so that's something that is frustrating to see. But yeah, I think it'll keep improving in the future for sure. So everyone can lose weight and body fat, but solidifying it is the hard thing and keeping it off is the hard thing. And so we're at a disadvantage due to the nature of the world. You press a button on your phone and 15 minutes later, 2,000 calories magically appears. Takes you 2 minutes to eat. Done. Like we're not designed evolutionary wise to like just have that ease of access to energy density, and couple that with the reality of sitting as we are now. Online coaching, it's so different. Like when I was in person, I used to work many, many years ago at Fitness First Bond Street, big gym, and I would easily do 25,000 steps, easily, probably more. I was tracking on my phone, and my phone doesn't live in my pocket.
Yep.
Now, I still get 10, but because I'm a very fidgety person, so it's different. But your energy balance, energy needs shift over time, and so that's important to factor in as well.
Yeah, 100%. Well, hopefully we can educate more people. Obviously, you spoke about before off camera that you and Mark are writing 2 new programs. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Mark and I,
very exciting.
We have an education business together, so Carroll Performance. We've done a lot of educating ourselves previously for other companies, but we sort of identified a need in the market for more information on quite a few things, but we started to dive firstly into program design because we feel a lot of coaches and trainers probably prescribing suboptimal protocols and prescriptions to their clients, which doesn't suit their goal or their needs. And there's not enough thinking why behind it and what are the outcomes or benefits or negatives from doing this. And so just the simple thinking about the why, but then thinking about progression over time is important. We want to have our principles and focus on the essentials, but we have to very much adapt to the client's needs and adapt over time. And so we wanted to create a course which is big, very, very big, to best position coaches or trainers, even the general population, if they want to write their own programs to achieve greater success, which will obviously improve their client results, their business profitability, but put a client in the best position to succeed. Because again, I think a lot of people can be the best versions of themselves, but they're not given the ideal protocols, or those protocols stay too fixed or rigid or constant.
I was about to say, do you think that the problem with most of the things in the industry, people might have something that works for them, or maybe they've learned something and they just run with that? I do have I have a sort of theory that a lot of people, especially in the fitness industry, and why sometimes people get misled, is a lot of people are quick to learn to regurgitate and repeat rather than actually understand. Yeah,
I agree. And I think a lot of people will think, well, this worked for me and I like this, so you should have that. Well, there may be things that you like. You may like squatting, but maybe your client doesn't need to be doing 10 times 3 low bar squats if your client is a 63-year-old grandmother with bad knees. But maybe she can benefit from doing a goblet box squat 3 times 10. And so we want to think principles and movement patterns, but adapt to that client's needs. And we have to be very mindful of our own inherent bias that we exist. And we're all biased to some degree, but we have to catch ourselves and just focus on like the client. Yep. And that's where I think far greater auditing and assessment initially is just so important. And again, I think that's a bit glossed over in the industry. So like, okay, let's come and do a session. Let's have a bash. Cool. You got tired, but did you get better? And so if it's like, okay, cool, we've done this for a while, but now what? You have to change the programming stimulus because training is a stressor. We want that stress, but we have to tweak that stressor to force positive adaptation. Because when we think about training, it's not just sets and reps and exercises. There's a whole multitude of variables to play with, and the more tools you have as a coach, the better. So that's why we wanted to very much talk about principles and concepts and look at all the tools in your toolbox and think how best to utilize them for different clients and different goals, because fat loss prescription in terms of programming can differ very much to hypertrophy or strength-based prescription. But two clients could have the same exact goal. Female client, I want to grow my glutes. But they could be vastly different levels and have vastly different needs. And so we have to very much factor that into our programming. And I think there is too much cookie cutter prescription, but we still don't want to, we don't have to be fancy. We don't have to be doing burpee box jumps and do it on a Bosu ball to get results. Like there's a lot of Instagram culture where you're getting likes, but results sell as well. And so a lot of my success and Mark's success comes down to results. And that's harder to do with someone else. It's easier to do with yourself because you're going to be more adherent and you want the outcome for yourself. We're selfish human beings. That's the nature. But it's different to get a result with another client. So that's where the nutrition's hard, the training's hard. And so we want to think more in terms of what does that client need and versus being a bit more rigid. So I like to be flexible.
Yep.
So I don't want to be flexible on the other end where it's I'm too flexible or I'm getting too fancy, because some people just need the bread and butter foundations. There's nothing wrong with that. So sometimes you need to regress to progress, and that's okay.
Very true.
Not everybody needs to squat and dead and bench, and a lot of people don't. Are they great exercises? Absolutely. But could you do a different hip hinge or a different squat or a different press? Yes. And so it's that principles versus rigid exercises, or I like this, so you get that. So I think that's that reality, just to think outside of yourself into like it's a business. And coaching isn't about, a lot of people get into the industry because they like, as we started off, why did I get into industry? My answer was, well, I liked moving. But obviously the more I got into the industry, the more it's very much about connection, communication, support, and assessment. And it's a human game. And I think a lot of people forget that. It's not so much about what I like, it's what does my client need. So,
yeah, I think, yeah, and as you sort of touched on within the fitness industry, is a lot of people get into it for, I wouldn't say selfish reasons, but obviously they enjoy it for themselves. Yep. And a lot of people see their results, and that's what draws them to it. You know what I mean? A lot of fitness personalities is their brand is them.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, what did you do to look like that? I'll do anything to look like that. Just tell me what you did. But obviously I like that your approach is obviously more flexible, and it's more of a customized approach rather than, as you said, a little bit of a cookie cutter, which can seem to be happening a little bit these days.
I agree. Like I still think it's important to have principles or some foundational protocols, but it's that ability to adapt those protocols, because programming does take time, but you can still tweak the exercises, the prescription, the sets, the variables to that client to better and perfectly match their needs at that time. And so I think that's really important, because naturally in this industry is like, it's weird. I always laugh about people wanting to train with someone because they look like something, but people forget about the reality of mum and dad. Genetics. And so like there's a large
sometimes enhancements.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was going to touch on, but I thought I was going to ignore that. But yeah, I agree.
We'll just slide that on the table.
Yeah, so I think people forget about the reality of genetics and pharmaceuticals. And yeah, so if we just focus on being our best version, but the challenge is people want shortcuts. They want quick fixes. And so
they want it now.
Exactly, but we can't all
be...
It's
our culture at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, we can't all be Usain Bolt, or we can't all be whoever. Like, that's okay, but you can still be better. And so some people respond differently, but that doesn't mean they can't get better. And so I think that's probably a big thing to flag. And that's where I get frustrated when people think they can't change, but it's more that they probably just went down the wrong path at that time. So we just put them on the path to success. Nail the essentials, be consistent, work hard. Over time, they will get better. To what degree? Naturally, genetics will play a factor.
Yeah.
But people can still always get better. But it's to what degree and how quickly is very much, genetic related as well.
Yeah. When can people expect this to come out, the courses that you're talking about?
Program design level 1 is gigantic. It's probably in about next 2 weeks.
2 weeks, yeah, wow. That's exciting.
It's probably about, in terms of raw hours, maybe 40 to 45 at least hours of Mark and I just talking.
Yeah.
There's a lot of whiteboard-based stuff. There's a lot. It took a while. I think I rewrote the course about 3 times. Mark's like, are you done yet? But yeah, I'm a bit obsessive like that, and I like things to be good. And we'll have a second one coming out in about probably 2 months, a bit more advanced. So the first one's more about learning the essentials and the foundations, but writing great programs and periodized programs which flow and connect, and they're structured to achieve a result in a multi-month period for any client level. But then the next one's more about doing it more of a 12 months or having more advanced tools, and what else can we apply for that advanced client or that longer term client who wants to go from good to great or from newbie to intermediate. So yeah, so that's what it's going to be about. There's a lot. If anyone can't write a program after Mark and I rambling on for 50 hours, like, I give up.
Maybe just change industries.
Exactly.
Back to finance.
Back to finance, yeah.
How is it, the dynamic of your relationship? How do you enjoy working with each other?
Yeah, so it's funny because we still have our own separate businesses, but with the education stuff, we are together now. We previously worked together for some other companies, which is funny. Mark's been in the industry a bit longer because he went straight into the industry when I think he was 19. And I went more the finance corporate route for a while, and then I went more formal where got official bachelors. But the reality, like, do you need them to be successful in this industry? No. Does it help? Yeah. Is it nice to having a few letters behind your name? Yeah. But could you read a lot of that stuff in a textbook? Yes.
We can buy your program.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. I think that's the beautiful thing about the industry is it's frustrating because it's so deregulated, but because it's so deregulated and it's such a new industry, you can progress rapidly if you find the right resources and people to learn off. But it may cost a bit of money, but it can also rapidly accelerate the process. I think Mark's previously said before, it might have cost him about maybe $100,000 of education, just professional development here, there, on a 2 or 3 year period. But now that's paying off and then some.
Yeah.
And so, again, that ability to think long term and want to be the best version of yourself and investing in your business is important as well. But you also want to make sure you're doing courses that actually benefit you. If you want to be an aqua aerobics instructor, do more aqua aerobics instructor. But if you want to be great at nutrition, physique transformations, programming, invest in those courses, but invest from the right people. And so that's important because very quickly you can go from a good trainer to a great trainer, which can very much transform your business. And if we think a bit more like that, like you can become elite quickly with the right tools in your toolbox.
Yeah, and just wanting to put in the effort, and as I spoke about before, is actually learn to understand rather than just thinking that you're going to be able to regurgitate the knowledge that you sort of pick up along the way.
Yeah, and I think a saying I really like is you don't know what you don't know. I used to think I knew a lot.
Yeah.
I thought when I started out I was freaking awesome.
The more like I learn about fitness and into the industry, the more I realize I don't know.
Yeah, and that's okay. And I think there's a lot of very smart people out there. So that's why, again, I never want to think about I'm an expert, because as soon as I think I'm an expert in something, I think that I would then shut down my ability to keep learning. So I always want to keep learning, and I'm probably too doubtful of my own ability, which causes myself a lot of stress, and my wife would hear about that. But that's okay. And so I think there's other options, and it's always, I think the best answer to a lot of people's questions often is it depends. And there's nothing wrong with saying I don't know, but I'll find out, and versus making something up or just assuming when you're not quite sure. And that's a human thing as well.
Yeah.
But it's okay. And so often the challenge of the fitness industry is often you're working for yourself, and so you're not around in a more intimate fashion someone who is way more knowledgeable.
Yeah, for you to bounce off and realize.
And so that's the benefit of working for a company or mentoring with someone, because it's like, oh my God, wow, they know a lot. I don't know what they're talking about, or there's a bit of a hole there, but that's okay. So that's where we get into that sort of more growth mindset. It's really important. So I think investing in yourself is such a powerful thing, because again, everyone can be a solid PT and it's solid money, but people, if we happen to not look like the next supermodel, or we're not Instagram famous or anything like that, like people can be very successful in this industry, even if they're doing boring old PT in person. I think people sort of look down on in-person PT a bit as well, but you can still be extremely successful, work hard in silence, and like be very, very profitable and make a big difference as well. But the cool thing about the industry is just the evolution of the online domain, but it's just evolved so much. As we were talking about before, like it's we also have to now become video editors, and we have to know all this tech stuff, and that's just something that's not my specialty, but you have to learn and market yourself. And I'm a classic introvert, and so me posting about myself or doing content is my absolute nightmare. But you have to do it, and so you have to come around. Well, at least if you want to work online, in person, you can nail it. And the best way to be successful in person is to talk to people and smile. It's old, I know, old school, I know, but it works. So yeah, that's how I'd sort of think about the industry as well.
Yeah, but it's all part of that growth mindset, isn't it?
Yeah.
To realize that, hey, editing's not something that I really like, but if you want to sort of push past that, get in front of camera, everyone's uncomfortable. Like, I don't care what anyone says. The most confident person, when you see yourself for the first time looking back and you're talking into it, it is daunting.
Yeah, 100%.
And it is. Even when podcasting now, I can hear my voice and I'm just like, wow, this is kind of weird.
Yeah, like I remember the first time I started doing educating to courses, and wow, that was intimidating. Even if like you're perceived as the expert and more knowledgeable source, it's still that sort of fear of failure or just the fear of the unknown of being stumped is always, well, for me, will always be there, but that's okay. It's like repeated exposure. It's like, if you're not used to it, it's going to be uncomfortable, but do it again and again and again. Like when I used to do courses back in the day, like day one sucked. First session was horrible. But by day 2 and day 3, I was a little more calm. A few more jokes coming out of me. Slow, heart rate going down a bit. But yeah, that's also me as well. Yeah. But you can get better at anything. And so I think it's, I think I'm just very passionate about passing on knowledge as well to other coaches, because I look at it as a way to sort of pass on knowledge to their other coaches or their clients as well. And their clients can then pass it on to their kids or their friends. And so you get that sort of tangential effect where it's that spiderweb concept where you may have taught one person, but that other person goes and helps 30 and then they go and help 40 or something. So that's how we can sort of have a big impact, but it's helping one person as well.
Yeah, can just focus on just pouring that knowledge into there instead of just throwing it out in sort of like a mass marketing type of way.
Yeah.
But it's a good flow-on effect now.
Yeah, for sure. It's
smart.
The education stuff's interesting, and I think we're seeing more education within the industry, but there's also a tipping point where I think sometimes people are focusing too much on evidence-based this, and the science says this, and it's important to know the science, but it's important to look up from the textbook, see who the human being is, and see what they need, and then that's where experience matters as well, because you may have a lot of knowledge, but then that practical application is so important, because it's not always going to work as a textbook says. You may drop 500 calories from their theoretical maintenance, but what do you do when the scale doesn't move? Or what do you do when something happens or like life gets in the way? And so it's just being realistic with human beings as to like what they need and how they adapt and evolve.
Yeah. Well, that actually kind of leads on to the next thing I wanted to talk about, and that was some handbrakes on fat loss. I seen one of your posts. You did a little infograph and you sort of went down, and it was a sort of yes or no, which fed on to other sort of areas. If someone is in a calorie deficit, say they've been on it for a week and the weight hasn't moved like they wanted to, what is something that possibly they can internet? And actually, first, why is this happening? Why do you so commonly see this happening?
In terms of the stressing out, in terms of dieting, do you mean? Or when
just the scales staying the same, even though, say, you said you've dropped up 500 calories from maintenance?
Well, it can happen for a lot of reasons, realistically. Like, I think non-adherence, consciously or subconsciously, is a big factor.
Yep.
Little errors can be very much impacting that.
Yeah, a little lack of knowledge on a lot of things.
Yeah, but if we dig a bit deeper and be a bit more sciencey, we can see shifts in terms of energy balance and little things like NEAT, so our energy output, like non-exercise activity, thermogenesis, a big mouthful of a word.
Yeah. God,
So
they came up with neat.
yeah, so
God.
you're fidgeting, you're talking, you're twitching, how much you move, that burns calories. And as your energy intake changes, that variable NEAT is highly fluid and it's very dynamic. And so a big thing when it comes to energy in and energy out, so calories, is that it's a dynamic relationship. And so you change one and the other one can change as well. To what degree it depends. So someone like myself, high stress, very fidgety, go, drop calories down, I just pretty much keep losing. And my concern is just losing muscle. Other people, say like my wife or a lot of people, like they can need a bit more of a nudge because they're better at conserving fuel. And that's great if you're stuck on a deserted island or you're starving in the wilderness with no food.
Or like pre the last 100 years of human existence.
Exactly. And so they'll probably live longer. So those people will better conserve fuel and function despite less intake. Other people can keep recognizing that deficit for longer and they still keep twitching in a higher stress. And that can be helpful, but there's always a yin and yang to everything. And so that's a not so desirable fact in other scenarios as well. But I think it's a matter of, well, different people just respond differently. And we have to identify that. So I think that's the most important thing, is identifying those individual needs for a dieting attempt. And that's often overlooked. But need is such a fluid variable, and that's why we can see theoretical deficits created, but actual deficits or actual scale drops aren't occurring.
Yep.
And so the other big thing when you think about maintenance calories, it's not a fixed finite point. It's more like a very fluid and dynamic range or a window. And so some people can have very large windows. And when I say large windows, they can be more adaptive, and that can be up and down. And so if I tried to overfeed myself to push into a surplus, I just fidget my life away until I just burn it all off. And I usually have to go about 1,000 calories above predicted to crack a true calorie surplus to actually gain weight. But then we have the flip side of things where someone drops calories and NEAT levels can fall, so they conserve a bit more fuel, don't quite get as much energy output as they would think. But as well, they potentially are just sitting at a higher end of their maintenance range. And so they may have dropped from 2,200 calories to 1,700 calories, but their maintenance range, they may have been at the top end. And so they haven't got down deep enough to elicit enough of a fat loss return, especially when you factor in changing energy needs or potential non-adherence. And I think as well, a lot of people don't move as much as they think they do. And that's where just being stronger in the gym is important, because the stronger you are, the more energy costly training will be. And so that's why if you just view training as just, a bit of pump, a bit of this, bit of that, versus strength, overload, progression, get better, like you burn more contextual calories. But that's where we can think about other factors like how much you're moving as well. So it's not just about the calories. It's about every variable we have to play with, like your steps and your cardio and your training as well. So it's fluid, it's dynamic. And so that's why you're tweaking a lot of factors, but you have to assess closely to better progress a client. So it's hard. Easy in theory, hard in reality.
Yeah, hard in reality. It all just sounds like numbers. You just subtract this, and so therefore the outcome can be that. A little bit obviously is numbers, but there's, as you said, it's forever changing. It's quite fluid in the way that it moves.
Yep.
But it's quite interesting what you said just before with the training and how you view getting stronger to obviously burn more calories. I know a lot of people, as you sort of touched on before with the burpees, box jumps, is like obviously great for Instagram and stuff like that. And there's a little bit of the notion that people really want to just try and get in the gym and burn calories and burn their way down. And interesting to hear your take on that.
Yeah, so I like to say there's no such thing as a fat loss workout. Simply because training isn't as energy costly as we think. It is energy costly. And clearly I'm saying if you get stronger, you burn more. But to what degree is that enough to evoke a real positive change in the scale? It's debatable. But we also want to think about when we're dieting, what is the best combination of the protocols to maximize a fat loss attempt? But again, it's not just about weight loss. It's about fat loss and muscle preservation when we're dieting. And so if you turn your training into just mindless circuits with minimal effort and you just focus on getting tired, you probably run a rated risk of, well, A, losing a bit of muscle when you diet, which we don't want because it's harder to build that muscle. But as well, it's like, well, things are a bit aimless. Like, are you going to keep chipping away week after week? Probably not. And so I still view training for the most part as like you're trying to get stronger. And certain things like chin-ups get a lot easier when you're a lot smaller. So that's a great time to push a strength-based goal. But then you also have to factor in the energy intake of a client because sometimes smacking out 6 sets of deadlifts, like it is tiring, and sometimes it is easier just to punch out 4 sets of a Romanian deadlift and some back extensions. So you have to be fluid. So I think sometimes we focus too much on the energy output of training versus focusing on manipulating the energy output from life to steps. And then strategically adding in cardio, manipulating the calorie in side of things as well, but also just being realistic that like we need to get clients out of a deficit at some point to factor in lifestyle and get them rebooting as well and just loading a bit more energy at times to keep them plugging away for longer. And so I view every client as a performance-based client, even if they don't, because you need to be performing better to be building a better aesthetic physique as well. And so that's important to flag. And yes, you can, as we'll touch on it in the course, there's a big module on fat loss and fat loss programming. There are things you can do to better support a dieting attempt, and you can make resistance training more energy costly. But how and when and why you do that is very like context dependent. And I used to do more perceived fat loss workouts, and that can work. But there's other ways to tweak the protocols to support a dieting pursuit. And I still want clients having a positive relationship with the gym. And if it's always this high rep, horrible, painful, aimless, mindless stuff, are they going to stick with it long term? Probably not. Potentially not. And so we want to think about like, why are we doing this, and let's get better at it. And it does get harder when you diet, but we can still get better no matter what. It's just the physical return in terms of strength progression or aesthetic progression may be more stunted if the calories are suboptimal versus when you're at a better point. But if we just switch off for 6 months, there's a better chance you may lose a bit of that precious muscle mass, which we don't want because we're trying to drop body fat and preserve muscle. Yes, you can build muscle in deficit. Is it likely? Less likely for most people. But it's possible. Yep. It's hard to do, and it's not a very optimal time to do it, but it can happen. There's a few golden scenarios when it can happen. But that's the other thing when we talk about, I think it was about earlier in that podcast, we talked about like what should clients know, new clients. Well, I think that, you can't have it all at once. And so that's why we talked about, I think, like specificity or priorities. And so you may want to do X, Y, and Z. You may want to look better, get stronger, run a marathon, be more flexible, have a better relationship with food, get leaner. Well, that's great. But what is your priority? What are we focusing on first? And what other goal may complement that? And so the promising of having everything all at once in a rapid time frame sets people up for failure. It's not realistic. And I'm not sure if that's a sales thing or a lack of education for everybody, but you can get better at multiple things at once. It's just a lot harder to do. But it's easier to lock into one pursuit, nail it, then shift the priority and focus on that other pursuit and better achieve that. So we get back into that net win scenario where I got leaner, I still got a bit stronger. Cool. I can now punch up 3 more reps on my chin-ups. Sick. And now we may convert the goal to a different one when you're out of the deficit. So let's go, okay, let's focus on performance goal. Or let's focus on getting bigger or better. So I think a lot of people get locked into leaner, or smaller versus let's get better. And they stay a bit fixed. Just like the calories stay a bit fixed, at least consciously as well.
Yeah, and I feel like it's that easy thing to sell in a way of like people understand the sort of calories in versus calories out. And it's kind of easy to sell that burn the calories type of scenario. But I think at the same time, obviously what you're saying is great because you want to obviously maintain muscle, but also like the psychology of it, of knowing that, looking at your watch and saying, oh, burnt 500 calories or whatever, and then you walk down the road and you see Macca's and it's like one burger's 500 calories. Like, how much of a head is that for someone to just go through that?
Exactly, and so you can put it back on really quick. But then we also forget about the energy cost of doing what we're doing right now. Like, we're burning calories right now.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not as much as we'd like, but it's still burning calories. So you may have burned 500 calories, but yeah, what's the net calorie burn? But then obviously what's the calorie burn post if you have an elevated heart rate? But is your nutritional strategy supporting that as well? Because everything has to complement, so it has to work synergistically. Because you can punch out a nice 500 calorie workout, but if you're eating 600 calories above your maintenance, you're gaining weight. So that's important to remember as well. So if you just focus on how many we're theoretically burning, key word there, theoretically, it's really important. So that's a theoretical prediction. You can plug in your weight all you like into your Apple Watches, but it's still an estimation, and it isn't actually tracking your true metabolic response, even if it's getting your heart rate, because it goes deeper than that. It can overestimate, it can underestimate. So we get locked into too much theory versus the reality of what is actually happening.
Yeah. So just to take it back, I know we're getting off on a lot of tangents
yeah,
here.
That's
good.
What I do.
It's good. I'm loving it too. I'm taking you that way.
That's why my course is so long.
So just for people at home, maybe they've it's been 2 weeks and they haven't noticed any drop on the scale.
Back-to-back question.
Yeah,
10 minutes.
It's been 2 weeks. They haven't dropped any.
Yeah,
What's something that they can manipulate? I did ask you obviously before what would happen, but bring it back to
the question. What to do? Well, obviously we want to think about first thing, are you adhering? Should you be dieting? Are you nailing the protocols? Obviously, are we actually making the right protocols? Firstly, the client could be getting a bit too, so the coach could be a bit too cautious or cute with it. But like it's simple in theory, and so we have to distort energy balance to alter what's happening on the scale. And so we're either decreasing input, so calories in, or increasing the output, so the energy cost of life. So we can artificially manipulate that via steps. And so we can add more steps. We could add more resistance training frequency, or in theory, energy cost. Push the sled a bit more. Add a cardio session. So there's a lot of things we can do. So we're trying to distort energy balance enough, and sometimes small changes are all that's required to elicit really nice progress on the scale. And we don't have to approach every scenario with a sledgehammer, but sometimes a scalpel does the job.
Yeah.
And so it's just enough to have that individual have their body recognize a calorie deficit to get some returns on the scale. But sometimes other factors are simply throwing things off, and that could be simply hormonal related, diet related, stress related. And often some people can be more variable on the scale, and that's tricky. So that's why people can be very up and down on their scale numbers, and that can make people pull their hair out, but you have to look at progress over time. But if you've been the same weight for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, and you think you're in a deficit, you're not in a deficit, because the scale should be going down to some degree. Yep. Maybe there are some fluid shifts. Like, dieting is fundamentally stressful. You will see elevations in cortisol. Cortisol can act on the kidneys and lead to water retention, but the reality is we should be having some positive returns. So then we have to think about, well, how patient are we going to be? Are we nailing the protocols? What is our time frame? What is the psychology of the client? Is the client ready to make a push? Do they want to push? And so that's why I think giving the client agency is important as well. And sometimes you have to save a client from themselves. And so you have to have that big picture thinking. Yep. But yeah, like, it's an energy balance tweak to get them going, and that could be you knock off a bit of calories, or you add a bit of activity, or a combination.
Well, I like how you spoke about before, just with not the sledgehammer approach, and sometimes the scalpel will do it. And I think a lot of people, as we just spoke about before, with the calories in versus calories out, they might think that the solution to it is to go and do a 500 calorie HIIT workout. Yeah. Where, as you said, they might be jacked up from the stress of dieting, the stress of the new training regime. And then it's like, probably the HIIT workout isn't going to do much for you. Maybe you should go do some steps, as you were saying.
Exactly. And yeah, it's a funny one when it comes to cardio and conditioning. Everyone loves HIIT. It's a tool. I view everything as a tool, and
it's the best way.
We all have different cards or tools to play, and what ones do we want to play for that client and at what time? We don't have to play all that cards at once, because again, it's getting back into the hammer or the sledgehammer scenario versus, okay, I'll add a bit more of this or take off a bit more of that. And it's taken me a long time to learn that and cultivate that mindset, and a lot of digging, and that's sort of what works. But that approach won't work for everybody, because if some people aren't suited to or desiring to track calories, you can't necessarily go that more precise approach. You have to go a different approach, but everyone's different. Yep. So all my clients are tracking calories, they're dieting and macronutrients and their targets. But some people don't track quite as accurately as they realize. That is tricky, especially due to the nature of MyFitnessPal and all the apps, and just simply, are you doing raw or cooked? And are you actually entering the right food? Because just because someone tracked that food choice doesn't mean the macros and calories that you scanned are correct.
Yeah.
And so this, again, we make assumptions, and often a simple tweak can elicit a positive return. And that's why I think just steps. It's just such an underappreciated modality. It's low stress.
Yeah.
You can get outside, get vitamin D, do it with other people, social connection. I think it's so important. And I think people forget about that versus, let's go crush them in the gym. And then they forget about the other 23 hours in the day. Or that it's like underslept and that is chronically, I'm underslept at the moment. That's another story. But I think if we just, a good PT and a good coach to me is very much locked into lifestyle as well. And that doesn't mean we have to be an expert in psychology, but you have to dig deeply to better understand the why. And sometimes telling a client to do a bit less in the gym, or just go get a massage, go get a meal. Sometimes it's actually better to have a meal, even if you're going above your calories, if they go to bed feeling better versus, I hate my life, I'm hungry. Because in the grand scheme of things, an extra 200, 300 calories in a day is minute in terms of your weekly progress.
Yep.
But if you do an extra 2,000 to 3,000 calories a day times 4 times a week, things are different. And so it's that ability to just be flexible but adaptable at the same time to keep people on track. And so it's almost like there's a bit of like, some people do have to grind, but you don't always want to think I have to suffer. So that's why maintenance is such a beautiful place to live. And that's why a lot of my clients, I spend a lot of time working on like cultivating a better maintenance with clients and just building it up, but then strategically pulling away from tracking to some degree. And that's hard to do. Fidgety, high stress people like myself can get away with things. Other people, they don't have as much wiggle room, so to speak, but maintenance is a beautiful time to practice weight maintenance, because the better you can maintain weight, the less you need to diet. And if we can better maintain our intake, balance our needs at maintenance, it's going to be a bit easier to do when you're dieting. Because if you have no ability to maintain weight when you're maintaining, why would you have the ability to lock in when you're dieting?
Yeah, that's a very good point.
So I think, again, people always want to rush diets versus, I get it, it's human nature. You look in the mirror, you're like, ugh, what is that? What's happening? Shouldn't have eaten that donut or 4 last night. But the reality is that sometimes we need to be a bit more patient and then pick the optimal spots to achieve the ultimate result.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's a very good approach. And I think people are really going to benefit from the course that you guys are bringing out, for the knowledge that you're obviously just showing on at the moment, and that whole big picture approach, which is something that I think this industry is lacking a lot in.
Yep.
But just a little side question here that I thought I'd throw out to you. What information do you think is missing in the public health sector in the way of weight control? You seem like that you're a sort of a big picture type of guy. What do you think that if you could have 3 things that your client would come to you and already have the knowledge on, what would those 3 things be to like for them to have the best success?
Health is contextual. What is healthy for me may be unhealthy for another.
True.
It's probably one big one as well, and that sort of relationship with food and energy intake, it can be a bit too rigid at times, and your energy needs can evolve over time. And so if you get a new dog and your dog goes on a walk, you take your dog on a walk for 45 minutes a day versus 0 before, like you're burning more calories, so you should consume more food. And so learning to shift and be a bit more adaptive with your energy intake is important as well. And so that sometimes if you need to diet, you're going to have to consume less at some point, but it's a temporary period of time. And we have to be mentally ready for that, for some people more than others. But then we don't want to live in that land. We want to get back to the sweet spot, which is maintenance. So I think that's the other thing, is that sometimes you need to grit your teeth a bit, but sometimes you also have to embrace getting to a better point. And for some people, that is scary, consuming potentially more than they have consistently and consciously. Because a lot of people will actually subconsciously consume a lot more than they realize, but they couple it with conscious underconsumption. And so that's why for a coach, it's like, I have no idea what you're consuming. And so I think just if you are going to diet, like, you need a bit of a prep or a pre-season phase. And so I think health is contextual, as I said, number one. 2 would be that energy needs can shift over time. And 3, I'd probably say if you're going to diet, pick your spots, do it properly, but adapt. And sometimes you have to lock in and alter your lifestyle, but it's temporary. And unless you diet, the better you diet, the quicker it's done potentially, but the less you have to do it in the future. And so they're probably some big ones. And I think, just more embracing just like getting better and like maintenance. So there's a few things there. I'm kind of rambling into 3 to 4 there.
Yeah.
But I think it's there's a glorification of lean versus focusing on better positioning other people for getting greater success. And so, it's just everything is very contextual. Adapt your energy needs, and then if you're gonna diet, like, pick your spots, be strategic, lock in, have an end date. But that doesn't have to be a fixed end point. You can breaks, you can move it. And so that's the big one. Like, you can't diet forever. And if people always mesh me, they're like, I've been in a calorie deficit for a year. No, you haven't. You may have been in a conscious calorie deficit for a year, or a relative energy deficiency for a year, which is an undesirable place to be. But we have to probably I think we just need more foundational education into just health, nutrition, movement, which factors in the reality of the world now, and also factors in the reality of modern sedentary lifestyles. And we get away from, I have to burn calories, and just, I go to the gym because I want to get better. It doesn't have to be the gym. It could be yoga, it could be anything really. So I think just pushing kids, but often it actually starts at the parents as well. Yeah. And so that's the tricky thing.
Lead by example.
Yeah. And so it's very much finding what works for a kid and keeping it fun for kids. Like, I used to do a good amount of strength and conditioning coaching with kids, and that was fun as well, but very different to someone who's an adult. I can't nerd out to the same degree. It's more, let's have fun.
Yeah.
So there's quite a few things to focus on, and I think I could easily dive into a lot of technical stuff, but I think it's that contextual stuff, maintenance and being strategic and adapting are the big ones for me.
Yeah. All right, little fun question for you. If you were stranded on an island and you had to prep 12 weeks to prep for a bodybuilding competition, you could only take one piece of equipment with you. What a piece of equipment would it be, and why?
I was tempted to ask what type of island was it. Singing Fiji and Tom Hanks, Castaway. Coconuts.
Is it palm trees or low-hanging trees?
Yeah, chin-ups. I would easily say adjustable dumbbells.
Yeah.
But they're heavy ones. Let's just say I was shipwrecked and I was able to walk it into dry land. Because for me, they just give you so many options, and you can easily split squat till the cows come home. All your lunges, all your pressing, all your push-ups. You can find a nice coconut tree and put some weight between your legs, into the rows, do a lot of stuff. So for me, adjustable dumbbells would be the number one thing I'd have if I had a home gym or a lounge room, and that's all I had. So I'd start with there. But adjustable is the key word, I'd say. Fix means you're stuck. Adjustable means you can change. Because again, I'm always thinking overload.
Yep.
That's what I'd go with.
That increased adaptation. Well, it can also be applied to isolation. I'm not sure there's a lot of people out there.
Exactly.
That would be it's been stranded.
Biceps were assumed.
Felt like
lateral raises were assumed. Booty pump stuff, I can do that too.
Well, thanks for coming on, mate. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you sharing so much knowledge with us. Please tell people where they can find you on social media, your websites and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I work for Atlas Performance Health. Our website is at Team Atlas, as in the team, and teamatlas.com.au. And my Instagram is Coach Carroll, so Coach__Carroll, CARROLL. And I'm pretty active. I'll be a bit more active on Instagram now that I've done my course. So
Yeah, once you
I've
sort of
got
got
a bit
that
more
big
time up my sleeve to play and share content. So that should be good.
Awesome, guys. Well, if you're looking for a course that's program design, definitely be looking out for 2 weeks or so when these guys are going to drop it. Obviously, he's a wealth of knowledge, so it'd be great for you guys to learn in, and sure it'll be worth the purchase.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks for having me on. Cheers, mate.